At my daughter's wedding, her husband raised a beer and ordered me to serve him in front of everyone. My own daughter laughed and told me to obey or leave. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I simply walked out. Weeks later, when their mortgage bounced and the sheriff posted an eviction notice, they finally understood. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. The slam of my daughter's words still echoed in my chest as if the walls themselves had taken her side. You will either serve my husband or get out of my house. Jessica's voice had been sharp, final, and cruelly indifferent. I did not answer with rage. The years had already taught me the futility of shouting against closed hearts. Instead, I let silence be my response. I smiled, though it felt carved in stone, and walked to my bedroom. My old suitcase, the one Martha and I had carried on our honeymoon to Yellowstone, came down from the closet shelf with a muted thump. It looked smaller than I remembered, or perhaps my life had simply grown too large to fit inside it. The leather was cracked, the zipper stiff, but it opened with the patience of age. I folded shirts with mechanical precision, slipped in socks, underwear, my medication bottles, reading glasses, and the photo of Martha wrapped carefully in tissue paper. Each item was both survival and memory. The sound of muffled voices drifted from the living room, Ryan's low, commanding bark and Jessica's softer, pleading tones. I knew they were debating whether to intervene, whether to gloat or to stop me. They stayed out of the hallway. Dragging the suitcase across the hardwood floors we had refinished 2 decades ago together, I felt the weight of history in every creak. No one blocked my way. No one offered a goodbye. Ryan sat in his recliner, the one Martha had given me for my birthday toy before cancer carried her away, his beer bottle dangling from thick fingers. Jessica leaned against the kitchen doorway, arms folded across her chest. Her face tried for sternness, but could not conceal the uncertainty in her eyes. I passed them without a word. Outside, the evening air was cool and sharp with the scent of pine. My Buick, steady as an old friend, rumbled to life on the first turn of the key. I backed out of the driveway without glancing at the windows. If they were watching, I did not care to know. The 30-minute drive to Pine Lodge was painted with memory. Every intersection carried a story of sacrifice. The overtime hours at the bank to pay Jessica's private college tuition, $40,000 a year for 4 years. The quiet decision to cover the $25,000 wedding cost when Ryan's family came up short, the $80,000 withdrawal from my retirement account to give them a down payment on this very house. Each figure replayed in my mind like ledger entries carved in stone. My Social Security checks had withered month by month, devoured by their mortgage, their utilities, their groceries. For years, I had convinced myself it was love. But love does not demand obedience. Love does not speak ultimatums. The Pine Lodge Motel sat on the edge of town, a squat building with peeling paint and a neon sign that sputtered between vacancy and darkness. My room was narrow but clean. One bed, a small table by the window, a single chair. It felt like a cell at first, cold and unfamiliar. Yet when I placed Martha's photograph on the nightstand, the room softened. At least one piece of home remained with me. I opened my laptop at the small table, the blue glow filling the silence. Numbers blinked back at me from the screen. Checking, savings, retirement accounts. Figures representing decades of restraint, of saying no to myself so I could say yes to Jessica. The cursor pulsed, waiting for my command. For the first time in years, I realized those numbers no longer belonged to anyone but me. I closed the lid and leaned back in the chair, staring at the water-stained ceiling. The absence of noise pressed in. No television blaring sports, no footsteps of a son-in-law who treated my house as his throne. Just silence. And within it, a clarity I had not known in a long time. Morning crept in gray and heavy, carrying with it a resolve that felt both terrifying and liberating. I spread my papers across the table like a general studying his battlefield. Bank statements, insurance policies, loan documents. Every sacrifice, every payment, every signature was recorded there. For years, I had enabled their lives piece by piece, convincing myself it was duty. But Martha's face in the photograph reminded me of a truth deeper than duty. Dignity is not optional. By mid-morning, I made my first call. The voice on the other end was polite, professional, unaware that she was witnessing the unraveling of a lifetime's worth of giving. I need to cancel the automatic mortgage payment for 847 Pine Street, I said. My voice was steady, but inside, something burned away. The representative hesitated. Sir, this payment has been active for 5 years. Are you sure you want to discontinue it? I answered without pause. Completely sure. It was the first brick removed from the foundation of the prison I had built around myself. More calls would follow. Insurance policies, credit cards, utilities, all the hidden chains that had bound me to their comfort. But that morning, with the weight of silence pressing against the motel walls, I knew a shift had begun. Jessica and Ryan had expected me to crumble, to retreat into apology and compliance. Instead, I had walked away, and with each breath, the truth grew clearer. They would soon regret their words, their arrogance, their belief that I was too weak to live without them. For now, though, I sat on the edge of a narrow bed in a cheap motel room, the suitcase by my feet, Martha's photograph watching from the nightstand. My heart ached, but beneath the ache was something stronger, something sharper. Sunday morning broke with a sky the color of old pewter, heavy and low, as if the heavens themselves understood what I was about to do. I sat at the small table in the motel room, papers spread before me like a map of my entire life. Each document told a story: mortgage confirmations, insurance receipts, credit card statements, all the proof of years spent feeding someone else's comfort while my own needs went unattended. I sipped the weak motel coffee, its bitterness sharp on my tongue, and dialed the first number. First National Bank, how can I help you today? The voice was cheerful, detached, unaware that she had just stepped into the quiet storm of my decision. I need to cancel the automatic mortgage payment for 847 Pine Street, I said, my tone steady, clipped. There was silence on the line, followed by the clatter of computer keys. Sir, I see that payment has been active for 5 years. Are you sure you want to discontinue it? Completely sure. The click of her keyboard became the sound of a door slamming shut. Very well, Mr. Miller. The payment is canceled effective immediately. You'll receive written confirmation within 3 business days. 3 business days. That was all it would take for Jessica and Ryan's world to begin collapsing. The second call came easier. My insurance provider had been carrying both their cars under my policy for 3 years, Ryan's Silverado and Jessica's Honda. $280 every month drained from my account for vehicles I never drove. I need to remove 2 cars from my coverage, I told the agent, effective today. The man on the line sounded almost bored, as if slicing away years of sacrifice was nothing more than routine paperwork. For me, it was liberation. One call led to another. Credit card companies. Jessica's name appeared as an authorized user on 3 of my accounts. For years, I had been paying off purchases I had never made. Groceries, vacations, gifts she had never thought twice about charging. Remove her immediately, I told the Visa representative. Any new charges must stop today. Yes, sir, the balance will remain, but she'll no longer be able to make transactions. That's fine, I said. Just close the door. By noon, I had made 8 calls. 8 pieces of my life reclaimed. My hands ached from holding the phone, my voice hoarse from repeating account numbers and security codes. But the ache was sweet, the fatigue lined with satisfaction. I sat back in the stiff motel chair, staring at the spread of confirmation numbers and reference codes scattered across the table. Each line of ink, each stamped date, was a record of independence rediscovered. For years, I had lived with a kind of slow suffocation, disguised as generosity. I told myself I was protecting Jessica, shielding her from hardship, honoring Martha's memory by ensuring our daughter never wanted for anything. But generosity had become servitude. Sacrifice had turned into exploitation. Now, at last, I was cutting the cords. The motel room was quiet except for the hum of the old heater by the window. Outside, cars passed on the highway, their engines fading into the distance, each one carrying someone toward a future unburdened by my decisions. I thought of Ryan, sprawled in my recliner with his beer, issuing demands as if my home were his kingdom. I thought of Jessica, her voice sharp and certain when she told me to obey or leave. I remembered the way her eyes looked that night. Not the eyes of the little girl who once pressed dandelions into my hand, but the eyes of a woman hardened by entitlement. The phone on the table was silent, but I knew it would not stay that way. Not once the bank statements arrived. Not once the mortgage went unpaid. Not once the insurance lapsed. By then, the panic would begin. I imagined Ryan's voice first, sharp and angry. "Clark, what the hell is going on? Fix this right now." Then Jessica's, brittle with fear. "Dad, there must be some mistake. The bank says they're starting foreclosure." I would hear those voices soon enough, but not today. Today was for silence, for breathing without the weight of obligation pressing down on my chest. Today was for reclaiming the dignity I had allowed them to strip away. I walked to the window and looked out at the parking lot. An elderly couple was loading their suitcases into the back of a pickup truck, moving in quiet coordination born from decades of partnership. She handed him the bags, he placed them carefully, and neither needed to speak. Martha and I had once been like that. Watching them, I felt the hollow ache of absence, but also the steady pulse of memory. She would have approved of what I was doing. She had always been stronger than me, always clearer about the line between kindness and weakness. My phone buzzed once, startling in the quiet. An unknown number. I let it ring, then fall silent. They did not know yet, they would. I sat back at the table, opened my journal, and wrote a single line beneath the day's date. I chose myself today. The ink dried slowly, but the words felt permanent. They thought I would bend, the way I always had, but this time I chose dignity over obedience. That night when Jessica told me to serve Ryan or leave, something inside me hardened. And when I walked away, I carried more than a suitcase. I carried the weight of every sacrifice they had mistaken for weakness. 3 days later, the motel phone rang for the first time. The caller ID showed Jessica's number. I let it go to voicemail. Her voice cracked as she pleaded, "Dad, the bank says the mortgage payment didn't go through. Was there a problem with your account?" A problem with my account? The irony stung. My account had been the very lifeline that kept their world afloat, and now they were drowning without it. By Wednesday, there were 12 messages. By Friday, 22. Some were Jessica's, her voice slipping from frustration to fear. Others were Ryan's, angry, commanding, almost desperate. I listened to them all in order, each one a chapter in their unraveling. "Clark, you need to fix this right now," Ryan barked in one. "The insurance company says our coverage lapsed. Do you know how bad that makes us look?" His tone carried the same arrogance he had wielded in my living room, but I could hear the crack beneath it, the sound of a man losing ground. By the time they appeared at the motel door, I was ready. Through the peephole, I saw Jessica's red-rimmed eyes and Ryan's jaw clenched with fury. I opened the door but stood firm, blocking their path. "Dad," Jessica whispered, her voice trembling. "We need to talk." "About what?" My tone was calm, measured. Ryan shoved forward. "About the fact that you're trying to ruin our lives over some stupid argument about a beer." I didn't flinch. "I'm not trying to ruin anything. I've simply stopped paying for your lives," Jessica's voice wavered. "But the mortgage, Dad. You can't just stop. That's our house." "No," I corrected, my voice low but sharp. "It's my house. My name is on the deed. My signature on the loan. You were guests, nothing more." Ryan's composure snapped. "You crazy old man. You think you can just walk away?" I held his gaze. "I didn't think. I did." Jessica clutched Ryan's arm, her tone sliding into desperation. "Please, Dad. We didn't mean it like that. You can't just leave us with nothing. We'll work it out, I promise." "You gave me an ultimatum," I reminded her. "Do what Ryan says or get out." "Those were your words. I made my choice." Well, her face crumpled, but she stayed beside him, the loyalty in her eyes directed at a man who had humiliated her father. For a moment, I searched her face for the little girl who once climbed into my lap during thunderstorms. All I saw was a stranger who stood with him instead of me. Ryan's voice dropped into false calm. "Look, we all said things we didn't mean, but this is bigger than some family squabble. You're putting our credit, our whole lives, in jeopardy." "Your lives," I corrected again. "Not mine." I started to close the door, but Jessica's voice broke. "What about family? What about everything we've been through together? Family works both ways, I said softly. For 5 years, I took care of you both. When it was time for you to take care of me, you chose him. Ryan cursed, stepping forward, but I cut him off. If you raise your voice again, I'll call the police. This is private property, and you're disturbing the peace. Other threats silenced him. They stared at me, and for the first time in years, I saw recognition in their eyes. Not of the soft-hearted father, not of the endless wallet, but of a man who had finally learned to say no. Ryan grabbed Jessica's elbow. Come on, we'll figure this out ourselves. They walked back to their car. His swagger dimmed, her shoulders slumped. She glanced back once, as if searching for the father she thought she knew. I let the door click shut and leaned against it, my chest heaving with something between sorrow and resolve. Back at the table, I opened my laptop and typed another line in my journal. They wanted me to leave. I left. Now they can learn to stand without me. The phone lay silent beside me, but I knew it wouldn't stay that way. The unraveling had only begun. If you've ever faced betrayal from your own family, if you've ever had to choose between your dignity and their demands, stay with me. This story is far from over, and the reckoning has only just begun. The diner smelled of bacon grease and burnt coffee, the kind of smell that clung to the walls and settled into your clothes. I had taken my usual corner booth, the one where Martha and I used to share a slice of apple pie after her doctor appointments. The clink of dishes and the low murmur of conversation wrapped around me like a reminder of simpler times. Then a familiar voice cut through the noise. Ed Miller, well, I'll be damned. I looked up to see Bob Harrison standing near the window, a folded newspaper tucked under his arm. We'd worked side by side at First National for 15 years, back when the rhythms of loan applications and client calls had been the structure of my life. His hair had thinned, his shoulders stooped, but his handshake was still solid. Bob, I said, standing to greet him, good to see you. He slid into the seat across from me without waiting for an invitation. Haven't seen you since Martha's service. Heard you've been staying out at Pine Lodge. Everything all right? The waitress appeared before I could answer, topping off both our cups with the kind of coffee that could strip paint. I let the interruption stretch, weighing what to reveal. Bob was a friend. Bob of a friend, but he was also a banker. Words carried weight in his world. Family situation, I said finally. Needed some space to think things through. Bob studied me over the rim of his cup. That son-in-law of yours tried to pull a fast one on us a few months back. The coffee froze halfway to my lips. What kind of fast one? Bob's expression darkened. Wanted a home equity loan, $50,000, claimed your house was his property, brought in documentation and everything. The diner's noise seemed to fade into silence. My house. He claimed it was his house. Bob shook his head. When we ran the title search, of course, it all came back to you. Clean title, no co-signers, nothing tying him to the property. When was this? My voice was steady, but inside I felt something cold crawl through me or two. December, maybe January. I handled the application myself because of the amount involved. Bob leaned closer, lowering his voice. Ed, it wasn't just a mistake. The documents were forged. This was deliberate fraud. The words hit harder than any insult Ryan had ever thrown in my living room. Fraud. Forged documents. He hadn't just disrespected me. He had been planning to rob me. Bob lowered his voice further. Word around town is that Ryan's got gambling debts, pretty heavy ones. He was probably looking for a way to cover them. How heavy? 18, maybe 20 grand. You remember Detective Morrison? He mentioned Ryan's a regular at Glacier Peaks Casino. Poker mostly. Higher stakes than a man like him should be playing. I sat back, the diner blurring around me. All the missing overtime shifts, the late nights he claimed were extra hours at work. It all made sense now. He hadn't been working. He'd been bleeding money into felt tables and card games, while I kept his life cushioned with my retirement savings. Bob put a hand on the table, his eyes grave. Be careful, Ed. A man who'll forge papers to steal from his own family won't think twice about other desperate things. I paid for the coffee I hadn't touched and stepped out into the cold afternoon. The air hit me like a slap, but clarity rode on its chill. By the time I reached the courthouse, my decision had hardened into stone. The brick building loomed heavy and official, but instead of intimidation, I felt an odd sense of relief. Inside, the clerk's office smelled of paper and ink, of rules and order. A middle-aged woman reviewed the property deed I handed her, her eyes scanning back and forth between it and the eviction paperwork. "Mr. Miller, you understand this is your daughter's residence." "It's my property," I said evenly. "The residents have violated the terms of their occupancy." "And those terms would be?" I had rehearsed this answer: mutual respect in contribution to household expenses. Both have been breached. She stamped the papers with the finality of a gavel. 30-day notice period begins today. If they contest, there will be a hearing. If not, the sheriff will serve final papers after the deadline. How long before they receive notice? Sheriff's Department usually serves within 48 hours. I thanked her, collected my copies, and stepped out into the hallway. Each footfall echoed like punctuation. No more whispered arguments in my own house. No more beer bottles in my recliner. The law was now on my side, and with it, the dignity I had reclaimed. But the day wasn't finished. At the police station, tucked in a cramped office lined with filing cabinets, Detective James Morrison leaned back in his chair as I told him everything: Jessica's ultimatum, Ryan's beer demands, the eviction notice I had just filed. He listened in silence, only his pen scratching across a notepad. "Ryan's definitely known at Glacier Peaks," Morrison said at last. "Plays poker, higher stakes than he can handle. Owes somewhere between 18 and 20,000. Some of his creditors are legitimate, others less so. And they're running out of patience." "Who are they?" "A mix," he said with a shrug. "Loan companies, but also some men who don't exactly use contracts when they collect." I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the weight of it settle. Ryan wasn't just entitled or arrogant. He was drowning. And in his desperation, he'd tried to drag me under with him. When I opened my eyes, Morrison was watching me carefully. "What are you going to do, Ed?" I exhaled slowly. "I'm going to make sure he never has the chance to steal another thing from me." That night at the motel, I opened a new file on my laptop. The title was simple: Ryan Thompson, evidence. The cursor blinked at the top of the page, patient and steady, waiting for me to begin. The beer had never been about thirst. It had been about control. Ryan's demand in my living room that day wasn't a casual request. It was a declaration, a reminder that in his mind, I existed only to serve. But control is fragile, and the moment I walked out of that house, I shattered his illusion. Now it was time to strip away the lies he had wrapped around himself, the stories he told others to keep the spotlight off the truth. In a small town, reputation is currency, and for years mine had been traded without my knowledge, Ryan parading my sacrifices as his own stability. That ended the day I decided to speak. At the post office, Mrs. Henderson from the church mailing committee cornered me near the stamp machine. She was one of those women who collected gossip like recipes, mixing and serving them wherever she pleased. "Edward," she whispered, eyes wide, "I've been hearing troubling things about family troubles. Is everything all right?" I considered carefully. With Mrs. Henderson, one sentence could travel through the entire congregation by Sunday. "Jessica and Ryan asked me to leave my own house," I said simply. "Sometimes adult children need to handle their own responsibilities." Her eyebrows shot up. "They asked you to leave after all you've done for them?" I didn't need to say more. The truth had its own gravity, and it would travel faster than any defense Ryan could invent. Later at Miller's Hardware, where I'd worked part-time after retiring from the bank, the owner, Tom Kowalski, called me into the back. 3 employees gathered around, concern written on their faces. "Ed," Tom said carefully, "we've heard you're staying at Pine Lodge. Is it true Ryan threw you out?" I didn't flinch. They made it clear that my presence in the house was conditional on obeying Ryan's demands. I chose to leave. The reaction was immediate. Dave, the assistant manager, shook his head in disbelief. "You paid for their college, their wedding, even their down payment, and this is how they treat you?" "Ryan always claimed he and Jessica were helping you with the mortgage," Sarah added, her voice sharp. I shook my head. "Ryan said a lot of things that weren't true." Tom's jaw tightened. "That explains why he never took overtime. We offered him extra shifts, but he always had other plans. I guess those plans were at the casino. By the time I walked out, I knew the story would spread like wildfire. Kalispell wasn't a large town, and truth had a way of settling into people's bones when spoken plainly. That afternoon, I met Pastor Williams in his office at St. Mark's Lutheran. The smell of old books and coffee clung to the air, comforting in its familiarity. He leaned forward, concern etched in the lines around his eyes. "Edward, several members of the congregation have mentioned you're going through something. Can you help me understand what's happening?" I met his gaze without shame. "I've been supporting Jessica and Ryan financially for 5 years. Tuition, wedding, mortgage, groceries, everything. Last week they told me I could stay only if I followed Ryan's orders. I chose to leave instead." The pastor nodded slowly, his expression solemn. "That must have been painful." "Clarifying," I said. "I love my daughter, but I won't be treated like a servant in my own home." He folded his hands. "Sometimes the hardest act of love is allowing someone to face the consequences of their choices. You've protected them from those consequences for too long." His words echoed long after I left the church. He was right. I had been shielding them, not loving them. But Ryan was not one to surrender quietly. Saturday morning, my phone began to ring with a new wave of voices. Tom from the hardware store, then Mrs. Henderson, then the pastor himself. Each message carried the same warning. Ryan was making his rounds through town, painting himself as the victim. "Claims you abandoned them without warning," Tom said, his voice thick with anger. "Told people you're having a breakdown, that Jessica's pregnant, and you refuse to help." The manipulation didn't surprise me. What did surprise me was how quickly he'd escalated. By noon, Detective Morrison called. "Ed, I want to give you a heads up. Ryan was here this morning filing a complaint about elder abuse. Says you're being manipulated by the bank into making bad financial decisions." I nearly laughed at the absurdity, but Morrison's tone was grave. He's trying to create a record of mental incompetence. He has no documentation, no witnesses, but it shows how desperate he is. Desperate men are dangerous, and Ryan was unraveling faster than I had anticipated. That evening, Jessica called. Her voice was thick with tears, trembling. "Dad, please, I know you're angry, but you don't understand. I'm pregnant. The stress from all of this, it's making me sick. The doctor says I could lose the baby." My grip tightened on the phone. The old instinct rose, the one that had kept me chained for years. Protect her, no matter the cost. But something about her tone rang hollow, practiced, as if the words had been rehearsed. "Congratulations," I said evenly. "Who's your doctor?" A pause, then too quickly. "Dr. Richards at the women's clinic." Martha had seen Dr. Richards for years. I knew that office well. "I'll call to discuss how I can help with medical expenses." Her voice sharpened. "You can't just call my doctor. That's private." "Then have her call me directly," I replied. "If there's a medical emergency, I want to help. But only through the truth." The line went dead. I sat in the silence, the motel walls pressing close, and realized the game had shifted. Ryan wasn't just fighting for control anymore. He was fighting for survival, and he was willing to use my daughter's voice to try to break me. But this time, I wasn't bending. If you've ever had someone twist lies into weapons against you, if you've seen truth distorted by desperation, stay with me, because Ryan's house of cards was about to collapse, and when it did, the whole town would watch. The call with Jessica had left the motel room colder than before, the silence heavier. Her claim of pregnancy echoed in my mind long after the line went dead. If it was true, it complicated everything, but the timing, the urgency, the way her voice shifted when I mentioned contacting Dr. Richards, it all smelled of desperation, not life. By Monday morning, I dialed the clinic myself. Dr. Richards' receptionist answered, familiar in tone, and I left a message asking for confirmation of Jessica's supposed condition. Hours later, the doctor herself called back, her voice calm and professional. "Edward, I can't share personal information without your daughter's consent. But I will say this, there is no emergency on file, nothing that would explain the claims you mentioned." That was enough. Jessica's story wasn't truth. It was a strategy, another attempt to pull me back into their orbit with guilt and fear. 2 days later, I found myself walking through downtown Kalispell when a commotion near the bank caught my attention. A small crowd had gathered, their faces turned toward a voice that rose above the hum of traffic. Ryan stood at the center, his posture aggressive, his voice pitched to carry. "He's lost his mind," he barked to anyone willing to listen. "Senile old man thinks everyone's out to get him. Kicked his own pregnant daughter out of the house over nothing." The words hit me like stones, but not because they were true, because they were deliberate lies, sharpened to wound. The crowd shifted as I stepped closer, recognition spreading across their faces. Conversations fell silent. Ryan turned, and for a moment his eyes widened. Then anger flushed his skin dark red. "There he is," he spat, "the man who abandoned his own family." I kept my voice level, letting the weight of calm carry more power than anger ever could. "Hello, Ryan. How's the gambling debt working out?" The accusation cut through him like glass. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A few people exchanged glances, pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. "You're crazy," Ryan stammered. "I don't know what you're talking about." $18,000, I said clearly. "Poker tables at Glacier Peaks Casino. That's the number Detective Morrison gave me." Gasps whispered around us. I turned slightly to face the onlookers. Amazing, isn't it? How much money a man can lose when he's not paying for his own home, his own food, his own life. Ryan's face turned purple, his jaw tightening as he stepped forward, towering over me with the same posture he'd used in my living room. "You senile old bastard. I can document every dollar I've spent supporting you for 5 years. I interrupted, my voice cutting sharp as a blade. "Can you document where your paychecks went?" The silence that followed was not empty. It was full, full of truth, full of witnesses who would carry this moment home and share it across town. Ryan's anger faltered. He saw it too, his control slipping, his lies unraveling. "Come on," he growled, shoving past the crowd. "This isn't over, Ed." I stood rooted as he stormed away, my heart pounding, but my voice steady. Several people pulled out their phones, recording, sending messages. By nightfall, the real story would be everywhere. Back in my motel room, I opened my laptop and added another entry to the evidence file. Public confrontation, downtown Kalispell. Multiple witnesses. Ryan attempted intimidation. Truth exposed about debts. Not long after, Steve Brennan, the Pine Lodge night manager, knocked on my door. His frame filled the doorway, his presence calm but serious. "Mr. Miller, I thought you should know your son-in-law was here tonight. Stood outside your door for 5 minutes, muttering about teaching old fools lessons. Made some of the guests nervous." "Do you have it on camera?" Steve nodded. "Security system caught it all. I can give you a copy." Security footage. Evidence that Ryan's desperation had crossed into something darker. I accepted the flash drive with steady hands, though inside unease coiled like a storm. The next morning, I carried the footage and my written notes to the police station. Detective Morrison studied the video with narrowed eyes, then looked back at me. "Ed, this shows a clear pattern. The confrontation downtown, the motel incident, the threats. You've got grounds for a restraining order." "What would that do?" "Legally prohibit Ryan from coming within 500 feet of you or your property. If he violates it, we arrest him." Morrison leaned back, tapping his pen against the desk. "There's something else too. He consulted a lawyer last week about adverse possession laws." The words chilled me. Squatters' rights. Exactly. He wanted to know if he could claim ownership of your house after living there continuously. Montana requires 5 years of hostile occupation. They've been there 3. He was planning to wait 2 more and then file. I sat in silence, letting the weight of it sink. For 3 years, Ryan hadn't just been freeloading. He'd been executing a long-term plan to steal my home outright. "Does he have a claim?" "None," Morrison said firmly. "You gave them permission to live there. They never paid property taxes, never had a legal agreement. But it shows premeditation. He's been planning this for years." The gavel fell on my mind before Morrison even finished. The beer, the ultimatum, the manipulation. It had all been about more than dominance. It had been about holding on to access long enough to take everything. By the time I left the station, A temporary restraining order was already in process. Ryan's world was collapsing from every direction. The law, the creditors, the truth spreading across town. And for the first time in years, I walked out into the cold Montana air with my spine straight. No weight on my shoulders but my own. The truth has a way of echoing louder than lies. Once spoken, it doesn't fade. It spreads like fire on dry grass. By the time Ryan realized what I had set in motion, it was too late. His debts, his fraud, his gambling, they were no longer whispered suspicions. They were facts carried on the lips of neighbors, documented in the files I had built, and soon to be sealed by the law itself. The sheriff served the eviction notice on a gray Wednesday morning. I wasn't there to see it, but I heard the story within hours. Jessica had opened the door, her face pale, while Ryan hovered behind her like a storm barely contained. The neighbors saw the papers handed over, saw Jessica's hands shake as she signed, saw Ryan tear the notice in half and slam the door. But the law didn't bend for theatrics. 30 days. That was all the time they had left. By Friday, the whispers had turned into open conversations. At the grocery store, Mrs. Henderson leaned across her cart and said, "Edward, I always knew you were generous, but I had no idea how much you sacrificed. People are standing with you." At church that Sunday, Pastor Williams paused mid-sermon to speak about dignity and truth, his eyes lingering on me as if to remind the congregation who the words were meant for. Heads nodded, voices hummed in agreement. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. But Ryan was not a man to fade quietly into shame. He stormed into the motel one evening, ignoring the restraining order as if it were nothing more than a scrap of paper. Steve Brennan intercepted him in the lobby, his broad frame blocking the path to my room. Voices rose, curses flew, and within minutes, 2 deputies dragged Ryan out in handcuffs. He screamed that I was destroying his life, that I was poisoning Jessica against him, that I would regret crossing him. I watched from my window, calm as the blue lights pulsed against the motel walls. It wasn't regret I felt, it was release. Still, the part of me that had once lived only for Jessica ached. Each night I opened Martha's photograph and whispered apologies to her. Our daughter was caught in the wreckage of her husband's arrogance. And though I could not save Jessica from her choices, I mourned the distance that had grown between us. I wondered if Martha would have been stronger, if she would have found a way to reach Jessica's heart where I could not. The eviction hearing came 2 weeks later. The courthouse was crowded, the benches filled with townsfolk who pretended to be there for routine filings, but were really there to witness the showdown. Jessica sat stiff and pale on one side of the courtroom, Ryan beside her, glaring like a cornered wolf. I sat opposite, my papers neatly arranged in a folder. Detective Morrison testified about Ryan's debts, his attempt to forge documents for a loan, his threats at the motel. The security footage played on a small screen, Ryan pacing outside my door with fists clenched. When it was my turn, I spoke plainly. I opened my home out of love. I paid for their life out of love. But when love turned into servitude, I chose to reclaim my dignity. This is my home. I am not abandoning it, and I am not surrendering it. The judge's ruling was swift and firm. Eviction upheld. 30 days to vacate. No extensions. No appeals. Ryan exploded, shouting obscenities, slamming his fists against the table until deputies restrained him. Jessica wept silently, her shoulders shaking, her face hidden in her hands. For a moment, I nearly rose to comfort her, but I stayed seated. Comfort was what had kept us trapped for years. Now the only gift I could give her was the chance to, when the gavel struck, I felt Martha's presence in the stillness that followed. Not in words, but in the quiet assurance that I had done what she would have wanted. I had defended our home, our legacy, our dignity. Outside the courthouse, people approached me, old friends, neighbors, even strangers who had heard pieces of the story. They shook my hand, patted my shoulder, spoke words of encouragement. For years I had been invisible, living only for others. Now I was seen again, not as a victim, but as a man who had finally chosen himself. And yet, as the sun dipped behind the mountains and the courthouse steps emptied, I knew Ryan was not finished. Desperate men cling hardest when the rope is nearly gone. He had lost control of the house, the finances, the story itself, but a man drowning in his own lies can still drag others under. That night, as I locked my motel door, I heard footsteps pause outside before retreating into the darkness. Ryan's shadow still lingered, even if his power was slipping. The story wasn't over. It was reaching the place where choices sharpen into consequences, where dignity collides with desperation. And if you followed me this far, don't turn away now. The storm is coming, and when it breaks, you'll want to see who's left standing. The motel room had become my refuge, though its thin walls and buzzing heater could never replace the warmth of a true home. Yet every evening when I returned, I felt a strange peace, an earned solitude after years of suffocating in silence inside my own house. The eviction ruling was final, but Ryan's shadow stretched longer than the courthouse steps. 2 weeks passed slowly, each day marked by the tick of the eviction clock. Neighbors reported seeing boxes stacked by the garage, Jessica lugging bags to the curb, Ryan pacing the driveway with cigarettes clenched in his fist. Word reached me through the town's steady undercurrent of chatter. The Thompson household was unraveling. Jessica called once more during that time. Her voice was tired, stripped of the sharp edges that had once cut me so deeply. "Dad," she whispered, "it's ending here. I don't know what to do." I closed my eyes, Martha's image flickering behind them. "Jessica, you do what you should have done years ago. Take responsibility. The house isn't yours to save, but your life still is." Her sob was quiet like a child's. "I never meant for it to get this far." "I know," I said gently, though part of me wondered if she truly did. "But choices have weight, and now you must carry them." The line went quiet after that, and I didn't hear from her again. On the 30th day, a sheriff's cruiser pulled into the driveway on Pine Street. I stood across the road, watching from the cab of a friend's truck. The deputies moved with quiet authority, knocking, waiting, then stepping inside. Minutes later, Jessica emerged carrying a box, her face pale against the spring sunlight. Ryan followed, his stride defiant, his jaw set as if he were marching into battle instead of defeat. One deputy taped the final notice to the front door. The other waited by the cruiser, clipboard in hand. Neighbors gathered at the edges of their lawns, some whispering, others staring openly. Kalispell was small and spectacle carried fast. Ryan dropped his box onto the lawn, the sound sharp and angry. He turned, his eyes sweeping the street until they locked on mine. For a moment, the world held its breath. His gaze was full of venom, his chest heaving, but beneath the rage I saw something else, fear. He shouted something I couldn't make out, but the deputies pulled him back, steering him toward the curb. Jessica followed slowly, head bowed, her steps heavy, as if each one carried the weight of her choices. I didn't move, didn't wave, didn't speak. Some goodbyes are too final for words. Later that afternoon, with the house empty at last, I unlocked the front door for the first time in weeks. The air inside was stale, heavy with the residue of smoke and cheap beer. The recliner where Ryan had lounged was stained, the carpet worn thin where his boots had scuffed day after day. But beyond the neglect, it was still my home. I walked from room to room, touching the walls, the frames, the worn banister Martha used to polish until it gleamed. Each corner carried a memory. Birthdays in the kitchen, Christmas mornings in the living room, Martha's laughter echoing down the hall. The house had endured insult and intrusion, but it had survived. Like me. In Jay, I left the bear on her bed and closed the door softly. That night, I sat in the kitchen with a cup of coffee, the silence thick but welcome. Outside, the street was quiet. The house settled around me with creaks I recognized like an old friend's voice. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like a guest in my own life. But victory carried no joy, only relief. I had reclaimed what was mine, defended it with the strength I didn't know I still had. Yet the Kushta lingered. My daughter was adrift, her husband consumed by debts and rage, their marriage a hollow shell. The man who had once invaded my home now haunted it only in memory, but I knew Ryan's story wasn't finished. Desperation leaves scars, and men like him don't fade quietly. His debts remained. His anger remained. And somewhere out there, Ryan Thompson was waiting, plotting, clinging to the last scraps of control he could find. As I turned off the lights and climbed the stairs, I whispered into the darkness, a prayer carried to the memory of Martha. "It's over here, my love, at least for now." But deep down, I knew better. Endings are rarely so clean. Some storms don't break with thunder. They arrive in silence, lingering like a weight in the air, until suddenly the sky tears open. Ryan's storm came that way, quiet at first, then violent, inevitable. It was a week after the eviction when the knock rattled my front door, sharp, urgent. I knew before I opened it. Through the glass, I saw him, his hair disheveled, his clothes wrinkled, his eyes wild. Ryan Thompson, stripped of pretense, standing on the porch like a man with nothing left to lose. "Ed, open up," he barked. "We need to talk." The restraining order meant I could have called the sheriff right then. But I opened the door, leaving the screen locked between us. His face was pale, drawn tight with desperation. "They took everything," he said, voice cracking. "The bank froze my accounts. The casino guys, they're coming for me. I need help. Just a loan, just enough to get me clear." My chest tightened, not with pity but with recognition. The man before me wasn't just broke, he was broken. He'd built his life on lies, and now the ground beneath him had given way. "You forged papers to steal my house," I said quietly. "You humiliated me in my own living room. You used Jessica's love like a weapon, and now you stand here asking for more." His fist struck the doorframe. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I was trying to fix things for us, for her. You don't understand. If I don't pay, they'll come after Jessica too." The words twisted in me. For a brief moment, the father in me wanted to believe, to step in, to save my daughter from the wreckage he had created. But then I saw the truth in his trembling hands, in the darting of his eyes. Ryan wasn't trying to protect Jessica. He was trying to use her one last time to pull me back under. "No," I said firmly. "This is where it ends." His face contorted, rage blotting out every trace of reason. He lunged at the screen door, shaking it so hard the frame groaned. "You'll regret this, old man. You think the law will protect you? You think anyone cares what happens to you?" This I reached for the phone on the table behind me. "Leave now, Ryan, or I'll make this your last mistake." The sirens arrived before he could answer. Steve Brennan had seen Ryan's car outside my house and called the police without hesitation. Deputies pulled him away, his shouts echoing down the street, curses spilling into the night. Neighbors stood at their windows, watching as Ryan Thompson was shoved into the back of a cruiser. This time, there was no crowd for him to manipulate, no audience to twist with lies. There was only truth and handcuffs. When silence returned, I closed the door, locking it with a finality that echoed in my bones. My house was mine again. Not because the deed bore my name, but because I had chosen to defend it, to defend myself. I sat in Martha's old chair by the window, the quiet pressing soft around me. For the first time in years, I felt something close to peace, not joy, not triumph, just the steady calm of a man who had weathered the storm and stood firm. Jessica came by once, weeks later. She stood on the porch, her face tired, her eyes swollen from tears. She said little, only that Ryan was gone, facing charges he couldn't escape, and that she didn't know what came next. I didn't lecture her. I simply placed the old stuff bare from her childhood into her hands and told her the door would be open when she was ready to return, not as Ryan's wife, but as my daughter. She left without answering, but for the first time I felt hope. A fragile hope, yes, but real. That night, I opened my journal and wrote the final line in the file I had begun at Pine Lodge. They thought I would bend, but I chose to stand. And standing, I found myself again. The storm had broken, the sky was clear. If you've followed this story, then you know dignity is not something given. It is something claimed, often at the highest cost. I lost years, I lost peace, I nearly lost my daughter. But in the end, I reclaimed my home, my voice, and the truth that had been buried under years of silence. If this story struck something in you, if you've faced betrayal or had to fight for your worth, share your thoughts below. Let others know they are not alone. And don't forget, subscribe, like, and stay with me. More stories like this are waiting. ChatGPT may have errors. Peace.